Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Andrea Saez, and I'm the Customer Experience Manager here at ProdPad. And with me today is Robin Zaragoza from the Product Refinery, and we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of OKRs. If you have any questions throughout, please drop them in the Q&A box or the chat box. I will be monitoring those, and I will be asking Robin your questions at the end of the webinar. So please be sure to drop them in. And without further ado, Robin, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks to the team at ProdPad for having me. So my name is Robin Zaragoza. I'm a product management consultant. I live in London, and I help product teams with defining strategy, utilizing OKRs to deliver on that strategy, and implementing best practices of product management process in order to improve alignment and collaboration on the team. And I started working with OKRs because I find it's really common for product teams to struggle with putting strategy into action. It can be difficult to understand how delivering any specific feature supports the long-term vision of a company. And it's especially hard to stay focused on what matters when you've got lots of stakeholders pulling you this way and that. So in working with OKRs, what I'm seeing is teams are having better conversations around what really provides value to the organization. And I'm also seeing greater levels of motivation and engagement too. So I'm really excited to be here today to share some of what I know with you about OKRs. Before I get started, I just wanted to make two quick points. One, given that today's webinar is with ProdPad, I made an assumption that a majority of folks on today's webinar work on product delivery teams. If that doesn't apply to you and you'd like some clarity around OKRs for other types of teams, please feel free to reach out to me after the webinar. And then secondly, I learned in putting this deck together that fitting everything into 20 minutes is just not possible, even though I tried. So that said, I wanted to provide you still with as much value as possible. And that means some of the slides are a bit text heavy, and I'll probably have to breeze over some of the detail in order to cover everything. But again, if you'd like any clarity about it afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me. I think Andrea is providing my contact information. So with that, away we go. So let's start with a definition of OKRs. I really like this one from the book Objectives and Key Results because it echoes a lot of the same values that we adopt in Agile and Lean testing, such as collaboration and use of measurements that equate to success. But what I don't think this definition really brings to light is that's different about OKRs versus other goals management frameworks is the ownership that teams take over defining their own goals. Typically, goals have been set in a top-down manner, but that approach assumes that management has all the answers. And we all know that's not the case. So this framework empowers teams to say, we hear you, senior management, we know where you want to take the business, and we're going to do our part to deliver upon that vision. And thank you very much for trusting us to figure out how to do that. It's pretty powerful and inspiring stuff. So where did OKRs come from? A very long story short, they started with Peter Drucker, who's considered the father of modern management practices, with the idea that if you told employees exactly what to do, companies were losing the ability to utilize all the knowledge that employees had to help drive the company to success. And ultimately, it's very demotivating to work in that kind of environment as well. So he introduced this idea of management by objectives. And then years later, Google adopted them and end of story, right? Because we all want to be like Google. I'm being a bit unfair here, though. The other major touch points in this timeline were first Andy Grove, founder of Intel, who started to use the idea of MBOs that he got from Peter Drucker in order to design the first versions of OKRs at Intel. And then John Doerr, who worked for Andy Grove at Intel, saw the power of OKRs, and years later, when he invested in Google, brought this concept to them. So as you can see, it's been around a long time, and it's come a long way since even the first Google days. But really, what are OKRs and why are so many companies adopting them? It can't be just because Google uses them. Not everything they do is amazing. OKRs are your short-term action plan for delivering against your strategy. And the number one benefit they provide is to create a common understanding of what drives value. And in everyone having that common understanding, teams can work with more focus on just the things that will deliver value and have a clear idea of what to say no to as well. As the typical cadence of OKRs is quarterly, they also enable learning and agility, the ability to change directions if what you're doing isn't working. And they also come with an expectation that everyone's OKRs are shared and visible to the rest of the organization. So they increase transparency, collaboration, and communication. So let's talk about what they actually look like. You've got your O's, which are objectives, and your KRs, which are key results. Your objective is the statement as to what you want to achieve that will deliver the greatest amount of value to the organization in that moment. A key point here is that objectives are qualitative and inspirational. You can almost think of them like mini North Stars for that quarter. Whereas key results are the measurements by which you know if you achieved your objective. There's nothing earth-shattering here. It's the same concept you've heard about SMART goals in the past with two additions. Specifically, the key results should ideally be owned by the team. That means that your team is actually able to impact the metric with which you work. And secondly, it should be progress-based, so that in the middle of the quarter, you know if you're headed in the right direction, rather than finding out at the end of the quarter that you didn't get there. So there's a couple of different types of key results. Baseline key results are basically when you feel like there's a metric that you need to impact in order to achieve your objective, but you don't actually collect it yet. So baseline would be, we're going to start measuring this thing this quarter in order to understand how to improve upon it in the future. Secondly, you have your positive, your negative, and your threshold key results. And this is where you want to increase something, to decrease something, or to maintain, increase, or decrease within a threshold. And then finally, you've got milestones. These should be ones that you use the least often. It's when you can't express something as a metric. So it's something you just kind of get to and there's not necessarily a number associated. I tend not to use those very often because I think they're much more difficult to have progress based over time. One of the other elements of OKRs is that in order to work with your key results and know how you're doing with them, you need to actually score them. And so there are a couple different ways of scoring your key results. I'm not showing them to you today. This is the version I like the best. I think it's the easiest to use. And essentially, if you have not accomplished anything towards your key result, you give that key result a 0. If you made some progress but didn't reach the number you were hoping to reach, that would be a 0.3. And this is kind of what you would achieve regardless of whether you actually paid attention to it or not. Your 0.7 is a success. This is the stretch. This is the outside your comfort zone that's a little bit difficult to accomplish, and it's what you have to focus on in order to accomplish. And then a 1 is basically you've exceeded all expectations. It was not impossible, but it was pretty far out there. So what does good look like with an OKR? Let's take a look. So let's say that your company's goal for the year is to focus on increasing profit margin, and your team has been hearing from customer service that they can't keep up with the level of phone calls they're getting, and hiring is frozen until margins have increased. So your team's idea is to, oh, sorry about that, guys. Shut off Slack. We're all on Slack these days, aren't we? So your team's idea is to empower the customer service team to handle more customer queries without actually increasing headcount. And there's a number of things that you can do in order to impact that objective. So first, you could actually decrease the number of customer phone calls. You could increase the satisfaction of phone calls. You could decrease the amount of time that customer service spends on the phone. And you might actually think that the number of times someone calls in about the same issue is an important thing to track, but you don't have it yet. So notice here that all of my metrics are associated with my key results, not my objectives. And also notice that I don't assume any kind of solution in my key results. You want your key results to allow you to change course on specific solutions in the middle of the quarter if what you're doing is not succeeding. So for the first key result, your team could try implementing a self-service model, or you could try building a support community, or you could even look at addressing features that customers call in about on a frequent basis that are just about usability, and maybe you can improve those. The point is you have flexibility, and the conversations are really about improving on these metrics rather than the specific solution that gets you there. So a couple of things you can think about when you're creating your key results that will help you to create good ones. One, you want to think about, if you accomplish all of your key results, have you actually achieved your objective? And in terms of the number of key results that go with each objective, 3 to 5 is a good number. Past that, it really becomes difficult to take enough action to impact all of them. We talked about key results being measurable. You want to make sure that you're not talking about tasks, you're talking about milestones or outcomes. So we're not talking about the features that you're going to implement, you're not talking about the timeline that you're implementing on, again, just the metrics. You want to make sure that there's no room for interpretation. You want to be able to say what is done. You want to consider opposite or maintaining metrics that create additional clarity. So for example, if we go back to my example, one way to decrease the number of customer phone calls by 25% could be kind of sneaky and taking the phone number off the website, right? But that's actually going to decrease your resolution satisfaction. So sometimes you can put some key results in there that make sure that you're being honest with the solutions for another key result. You want to set at a stretch. So basically a little bit outside your comfort zone, definitely past what you would be able to accomplish if you weren't paying attention to it. And then the other thing to consider in terms of the number of key results and overall for the number of OKRs that you decide to implement, you want to be realistic with what you're doing as normal everyday work. So your business as usual. So maybe your things as business as usual on a product team might be bugs. You know, you just always develop towards 20% of your time being spent on bugs. So all of your OKRs have to take into account that 80% of your time is available for OKRs and 20% of your time is not. So overall, OKRs are more successful if entire organizations adopt them. And in this way, you ensure that each team defines and understands how their specific work supports the overall strategy. But if your company isn't there yet in terms of the entire organization adopting OKRs, they can still be effective for just delivery teams, as long as you have buy-in from senior management that you'll be using OKRs to define your work every quarter, and they agree to abide by those priorities. I'll also say that in some documentation around OKRs, you'll find the idea of OKRs all the way down to the individual level. For the most part, I don't see this as necessary. And in fact, if your company is new to OKRs, this just creates an additional level of complexity that will ultimately slow you down on achieving your team OKRs. There are certain circumstances where individual OKRs may be needed. For example, an individual contributor who's not part of a team, maybe like a lone legal advisor at a small company. But in most other cases, team OKRs are the way to go. And a quick definition of what I mean by team. I am not talking about organizational functions. What I'm talking about is teams that work together to deliver finished products. So that means your product manager, your 5 to 7 developers, and your 1 UX. They're all working on a product or an area of the product. That's considered a team, and that team should have OKRs together. It's not a good idea to have the development team have their own OKRs, the UX team have their own OKRs, because what you'll see is conflicting OKRs, and it's very difficult to resolve those. Sometimes I get asked how OKRs work with roadmaps. There's still a little bit of debate and emerging opinion on this, but my personal stance is that OKRs are your roadmap. They are your point of communicating to the organization and to stakeholders what your top priorities are for the quarter. You can still work with the idea of themes or solutions and features if that's what's in your roadmap today, but those become supportive information around what you're doing to accomplish your OKRs rather than a commitment to deliver those exact features. So when you're having those conversations, and in fact, when you're presenting your roadmap, it should really reflect your OKRs as the top level piece of information. So just to recap a little bit about best practices of OKRs, less is more. If you're really new to OKRs and you're feeling really nervous or you're not sure how the organization is going to do with it, maybe even just start with 1 OKR for a quarter. A lot of teams I work with end up with 2 to 3 OKRs and 2 to 5 key results for each objective. I didn't go into this too much, but you cascade from the top. Your OKRs should be based on what's happening at the corporate level. And so if your company has adopted OKRs, you should see that your OKRs connect to the company OKRs. That said, it's a top-down and bottoms-up approach. So the OKRs of teams needs to be fed back up to the senior level to get alignment and approval. You also want to align cross-functionally and make sure that you're not working on key results at the same time as another team, and therefore it's going to be really difficult to track what activities each team is doing that's impacting that key result. And you also want to align cross-functionally because sometimes you're trying to impact a key result that requires the support of another team or another person across the organization. And you want to make sure they understand that, that you're depending upon them and get their buy-in on that as well. You also want to have regular check-ins. Personally, I'm a fan of weekly check-ins, a little bit like the daily stand-ups. If you're not looking at that stuff on a frequent basis, it's really easy to set it and forget it. So when I work with teams on OKRs, I'm usually looking for a very early of the week meeting that they're already having to input OKR discussion around that. So that might be an extended stand-up on Mondays, for example. And then also scoring to track progress. You don't want to get to the end of a quarter and realize, oops, we completely missed that because it was sort of a yes or no, we did it or we didn't do it. You want to be able to track over time. So a couple of slides around tracking and how you actually logistically do this. There are tons of options out there, tons of tools, and I've heard great things about a lot of these tools. But to be honest, I don't have a strong opinion about any of them. And for teams early in the phases of implementing OKRs, I don't think tools are essential. What I think is keeping it simple is best. And I found working with an Excel or Google spreadsheet to be just the trick. And this is a template that I use with my clients that I've adapted from howtookr.com. And I really like it. One, because it's simple, it's accessible if it's on Google spreadsheets. And what it does is it allows you to track over time. So you can see you start with a 0, which is you've not made any progress because it's the first week of your quarter. And then every week when you're having your conversations, you're looking at how much progress have we made on this particular key result. And you can format the document to change colors when you've reached certain thresholds. So here I have your .3 and your .5 as yellow, and I've got 0.7 and 1.0 as green. And so that sort of visually lets the team see, okay, we're good with that one. Let's really start to focus on a different key result that we haven't looked at yet. And then the other thing I like is to be able to average out the key results for a total number that you achieved at the end of the quarter for the objective. And this really helps senior management when they're trying to understand what did you accomplish this quarter. You can talk about it at the objective level rather than at each key result. Because sometimes you see key results go up, go down, but at the end of the day, they want to know, what did you deliver? So let's talk a little bit about cadence of OKRs. So generally speaking, I said earlier, OKRs are typically quarterly. Sometimes I've seen teams do longer cycles or shorter cycles. Longer cycles, you start to get demotivated because you're not making a lot of progress, and shorter cycles, there's just not enough time to actually impact more than 1 or 2 key results. So quarters are a nice cadence. And this is just a nice image from Felipe Castro around what does the cadence look like at a very high level. And it's basically set your OKRs, align them across the organization and up and down the organization, and then work on achieving them. To make that a little bit more applicable to your daily life, what that means is for 2 to 4 weeks, you are reviewing your progress from the previous quarter, you're setting your new OKRs and you're aligning them. 2 weeks is a little bit aggressive unless you've been working with OKRs for a while. I'd say a 4-week period is probably more realistic. So if you're heading into a quarter, you should really start the process 2 to 3 weeks before that quarter begins, so that by the first or second week of the next quarter, you're already ready to go and working with your OKRs. And then weekly check-ins every single week. However, in order to do that, you really do have to understand what's happening with the company. So at a very minimum, the company, or if it's not the company, if it's an entire product line, is reviewing what is our strategy, what are our high-level goals for this year, how did we do last year, and what do we want to accomplish now, so that you have that alignment for the full year. You can think almost in quarters. This quarter, the most important thing we do, and then we can put the rest for quarters 2 through 4. So is your team ready for OKRs? I do work with some clients who have tried OKRs in the past and have found that it failed. And usually that happens for a couple of reasons. The first is that they don't have the building blocks for OKRs. Really, you need to have a very clear vision and very clear strategy in order for you to even understand what is valuable to this organization. So if you feel like you don't have clarity on these things, I would say don't start with OKRs until you get there. The second thing that I see organizations failing with is buy-in. So if you don't have alignment from your team members, from senior management, you're not really going to make a lot of headway with OKRs. So make sure you communicate across the board why you want to work with OKRs, the value you think it provides, how it's going to work. So assuming you have those two things, getting started looks like this. First, get senior stakeholder buy-in and plan out what the OKR setting process is going to look like, especially what your workshops are going to look like and who you're working with. The concept of OKR champions is not one I see in many places, but I do believe it's really important for teams to have people who are willing to move it forward. When teams don't have that, I find that meetings don't get scheduled. The conversations are not happening at the right level. Teams might be discussing what the progress is, but not discussing learnings. So this is an idea that I encourage you to have OKR champions for functions or for groups of teams, that they can align everyone and make sure everyone's moving in the same direction. Make sure you produce tools and resources to support the process. So that might be the tracking tool, it might be some educational information, it might be a timeline. You need to hold OKR educational sessions before you start the whole thing. You want people to understand what it is that you're trying to implement before you actually go through the process. And you want to make sure that everybody understands the company vision and strategy. So one thing I'll say as sort of my last thought is that when you are implementing OKRs, you will fail. It'll take you several cycles of OKRs to really understand how it works for your team. The types of ways that you might fail are either in sandbagging, meaning your key results were too easy, or your key results might be too hard. You might have great OKRs, but you miss out on the weekly check-ins, or you miss out on the main points of the conversations in the weekly check-ins. The point is that you need to commit to using OKRs, and the same way that you use retrospectives in sprints to understand what went well and what didn't go well in that sprint or series of sprints, you should do the same thing with OKRs. Every time you go through a cycle, try to understand what did we do well, what didn't we do well, and what do we need to change next time around. And eventually you'll get it. Within 3 to 4 sprints, you'll feel like it's really providing a lot of value. So if you are the one taking this to senior management, also set the expectation that you're going to need to move through failure in order for it to work. And just one cadence of OKRs is not going to be enough. So that is everything I was running through today. Thank you so much for listening. Andrea, I think I throw it over back to you for questions now.
Yeah, so we have one question that's been asked 4 times already. So I think I'm going to start with this one,
All right.
which is how do you sell senior management or C-level executives on actually using OKRs? How can you prove that they're actually worth investing in, particularly for really large companies?
Yeah. So I will say if you are sort of mid-level and lower at a really large company, there's no way for you to do that on your own. But it's a really good question. I think the thing around OKRs is it's outcomes-based, not output-based. And it's a little bit around the same challenges that teams sometimes face when they're looking at promising or implementing features rather than the directionally where they want to head. So I think it's a place where you can use evidence to say, here's what we worked on the last quarter, and we don't know what value this provided. We would like to use a system that focuses more on value, and here's how we would prioritize things if that's the case. And sort of use evidence from what hasn't worked about your process in the past in order to provide motivation for a new system. You can also just try running it on your team without having everybody else adopt it, and really start to understand the momentum that it provides you and the power it provides you first to gather that evidence ahead of time.
Great, thank you. The next question is, do team OKRs have one or multiple owners?
So the team owns the OKR, but sometimes key results can be spearheaded by specific individuals. It's a little bit less the case on product teams, more so the case on teams that are, functionally driven. So for example, sales or customer service, there might be someone on the team who's responsible for a specific project that is contributing towards a KR. But the team owns the OKR. I'm not sure if I answered that very well.
Let us know if that answered your question, by the way. The next question is, let me pick a good one from here. Company strategy and goals, do those exist as OKRs, or do you use them as guidance to form your team OKRs?
They are separate. So company strategy would be, who are our customers? How are we, what are the channels we're using to deliver our products? What's the pricing look like? Who are the partners that we're working with in the whole thing? That's company strategy. So that's obviously a separate thing. And usually what the company will say is, this is generally our strategy, and this year we're focused on X. And therefore you would use that sort of long-term company goal towards the strategy in order to set your team OKR.
Cool. We've got a really interesting one here, is how can we deal with cross-team dependencies that have their own OKRs and their own prioritization? Could something become a potential blocker?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're setting your OKRs, it's a really good idea for all of the teams that are doing this to set them at the same time. And what you can do is you can have cross-alignment meetings where you sort of got a representative from each team reviewing with the other teams where there are potential dependencies or conflict, to say, this is what we're working on, and have some agreement about how you're going to support each other. And potentially it means going back to your team and saying, you know what, we need to change our KRs here a little bit. So it's, like everything else, it's really around conversation and alignment and compromise.
Cool. We have a question here from Vicky that says, if the whole team owns the OKR, how do you deal with accountability? Who is ultimately accountable if the objective overall is not met? It's a good one.
I'm going to ask a little bit of an existential question here. Why does one person have to be accountable?
I was going to say a very similar thing, actually. So the way we work with OKRs here is we have an objective and we have KRs, but within those KRs we have different projects.
Mm-hmm.
but there are different team leads for those projects. So essentially, we are all responsible. There's
Yeah.
not a single person. If you're putting the onus on one person, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and I didn't say this earlier, but I will say OKRs should never be used for performance evaluation. That's not the point of them. So if that is part of the question, then I would say that maybe the company culture needs to look at why are they using OKRs? Because it's not for that. It's really to drive value to the organization, not to evaluate how one individual is doing. So if a team doesn't deliver on their OKR as a team, they have to admit to the organization, we didn't reach it. Here's why. And is this OKR still valid? Do we need to carry it forward into the next quarter? And here's what we learned from the last quarter in order to inform what we're going to do differently this coming quarter.
That's great. We have another question here, which is who should be setting the objectives for the delivery team? Would it be the product manager?
I think the product manager plays a really important role in facilitation because often the product manager has the widest view of business priorities, of customer needs, of stakeholder opinions. That said, it is not the responsibility of the product manager to define them. The entire team defines the OKRs. And there's not enough time for me to sort of go into how that works. But generally speaking, if you have some direction at the company level, you can have someone or a small group of folks on the team start to come up with some ideas and then feed it into the team in order to get feedback on it. Or you can actually hold a workshop where you ask very specific questions in order to elicit ideas around what's going to provide the most amount of value. But it's a team effort. It's a collaborative effort.
Wonderful. We have a couple of questions that are coming in. So many questions. I'm trying to pick a good one. Is it okay if the product manager is driving the key results? I think you kind of just answered that. It really shouldn't be down to one person, as you said.
Yeah, it really should be a team effort to define the key results. If you're using different methods of prioritization, like dot voting, for example, in your feature prioritization today, that's one element you can use in order to elicit from the team where everyone thinks the best key results are that support an objective. But again, it's at the team level.
And with that said, how would you go about narrowing down or picking those OKRs? Should the PM be picking? Again, I don't think that's the right thing to do. Should it be a vote? How would you actually go about narrowing these OKRs for your team?
Yeah, so I can give a little bit of a description about how I usually run OKR workshops. So basically when I run these, I usually sit down and make sure that we run through strategy and company goals first to make sure there are no questions about that. And then I start to, if anyone's sort of familiar with synthesis and sort of Post-it notes and using one idea per Post-it note, I'll start to ask a bunch of questions around what can our team do to deliver towards this company goal? And you just start putting things on Post-it notes. And after you get a bunch of those questions answered, you start to theme them up into different areas, different ideas. And those areas become potential objectives. I don't name them at this point, but I just create themes around objectives. And then after that, I prioritize the objectives with the team to, with a little bit of dot voting. And then after that, we take the top objectives and we start to talk about what are different metrics that would prove that we reached this, what are key results that would prove that we met this objective. And again, we come up with a bunch of ideas with Post-it notes, some more dot voting, and then we start to hone in a little bit more on, okay, this idea of this metric makes sense, but let's really flesh that out into 2 to 5 key results. And after that, then we sort of name the objective a little bit more. So that's generally how I run OKR workshops. Hopefully that was clear enough.
Thank you. We have one last question. There's a lot of questions that are coming in, but we are running out of time. And I am conscious that Robin has other things to do. But someone asked if you have any recommendations for books to read about OKRs.
Yeah, so the most popular book is Radical Focus by Christina, I'm going to butcher her name, I just have no idea how to say it, Christina Woodke. I think it's a really great book in terms of understanding the value of OKRs, but I don't love her suggestions of implementation. I think, they're not quite deep enough. I like objectives and key results. It gets a little bit more into the details of how to implement things. And that one is by Paul Niven and Ben Lamort. There are other popular books, but I think those are my two favorites. And then in terms of, just Medium has tons and tons of articles about OKRs. There's lots of blog posts out there. Google has some information about it. And then there's OKR consultants that you can work with, or product management consultants like myself that you can work with on OKRs if you want some external help.
Absolutely. We are also going to be sending some recommendations and things to read as well as a follow-up to this webinar. And of course, we will also be sending Robin's information if you guys want to reach out with any questions. Thank you, Robin, so much for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for attending. As I said, we will be following up over the next week with more material. And of course, we will be sending you the recording of this webinar so you can watch it back or share it with those high-level executives that you want to try and convince. So hopefully this will be a great start. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Bye, everyone.